In 2 minutes, I'll say good afternoon, but right now I'll say good morning. My name is Michael Keller. I'm the university librarian, and I am delighted to see you all here today. It is both an honor and a privilege to welcome Kersti Kaljulaid, the president of Estonia, to this podium and to this room, which has been also the site for talks by her predecessor, Toomas Ilves, who's with us here today, the former Prime Minister, Taavi Rõivas, and many other officials of that great nation. Since 2002, when we began our Estonian and Baltic Studies program here in the libraries, which arose from the generosity of Walter Kistler and Olga Ritso Kistler, an Estonian, and their daughter and son-in-law Sylvia and Andrew Thompson, we have been fortunate to have made friends with many in the Estonian and Baltic communities. We've also been active participants in the programs of and revitalization of the Museum of Modern Estonian History, known now as Vabamu, Freedom's House. Many of you may know Liisi Esa, our curator for Estonian and Baltic Studies, who has spearheaded our efforts in acquiring material and organizing programming to further the academic reach in these areas. Liisi organized the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies, a conference for close to 500 people that was held here in June. However, she's recently gave birth to a baby boy, for which we all cheer, and so she's unable to be here today. I thank her for all of her efforts in establishing these relatively new and absolutely strong connections we now have with these important communities. I also thank her for having a child who will be both a citizen of the United States and of Estonia. We have learned in past years from the presence and presentations from Toomas Hendrik Ilves, predecessor to today's distinguished guest, and also a fellow here at Stanford in the FSI and the Hoover Institution. We continue the tradition of the presentations by Estonia's president by welcoming Kersti Kaljulaid, President of the Republic of Estonia. Madam Kaljulaid is the fifth democratically elected president of Estonia in office since October of 2016. She is the first female head of the state of Estonia since the country declared independence in 1918, as well as the youngest ever president in that independent nation, that now independent nation. President Kaljulaid previously served as a member of the European Court of Auditors, on the Europol Audit Committee, and on the Administrative Affairs Committee of the Court of Auditors. She has also been a member of the Supervisory Board of the Estonian Genome Center, the Advisory Board of the University of Tartu, and the Council Chair of that university. President Kaljulaid has received multiple international awards for her service, including the Order of the White Rose of Finland, the Order of the Netherlands Lion, and the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic. The President earned an undergraduate degree in biology cum laude from Estonia's great and ancient University of Tartu. She earned an MBA from Tartu, and she is a member of the oldest sorority in Estonia, the Filii Patriae. Before entering government roles, President Kaljulaid had a career in business, telecom, project management, and banking, before becoming an economic advisor to the great Prime Minister Mart Laar. Then she was director of a power plant, the first woman in Estonia to have that role. Wonderful. Kersti Kaljulaid and I have had numerous discussions in recent times, especially last night. And let me tell you that she is a pragmatic patriot with strong overreaching goals that she pursues for Estonia. Among them, the devotion to freedom as the essential condition for the success and satisfaction of Estonian citizens, and an equally strong insistence upon education for all citizens and residents of Estonia. She has famously said that, and I quote, "A small country has only one resource, between our ears," close quote. We are delighted to have her and her delegation here in the Bay Area. After President Kaljulaid's presentation, there will be a brief few minutes for questions for her. Please now give a warm Stanford welcome to President Kersti Kaljulaid. Welcome to this podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today. Thank you also for very kind words of introduction, and also the density of Estonian presidents in this room is quite high indeed. Welcome also, President Ilves. I'm very happy to see you here. I also heard the previous speakers from Estonia include also former Prime Minister Taavi Rõivas, etc. So we have probably heard quite a lot about digital Estonia. I will come to it as well, but I will rather try to convince you that Estonia being a practical, useful, low bureaucracy, technological sandbox for Nordic countries is something which is already adding value to their socio-economic model and will continue to do so if we all play our cards up there right. Also, I think after I'm done, you will understand a bit better why Estonia became this digital nation. Nordic socio-economic model will definitely be more sustainable and enhanced by the fact that the Baltic countries have grown to be a natural part of their ecosystem. And it is easy to see in economic development, so we will look mostly at those aspects. The Baltic and particularly Estonian approach has changed traditional industrial thinking in Scandinavian countries into much more flexible startup way of thinking. And why in Scandinavia and not in other countries in Europe? I think this will become clearer also soon. For example, already more than 10 years ago, the Swedish government was forced to establish a special tax reform board in order to seek modification to their traditional, heavily progressive tax system, driving all professional sportsmen and popular writers out of the country. Not talking about tax optimization by businesses, which of course was less visible to the society, but was definitely causing losses to the tax gathering in Sweden. And this decision was clearly influenced by up-and-coming Baltic economies, which all were presenting their businesses and their people with much less progressive tax models. Scandinavian businesses, meanwhile, of course, they were at the same time taking great advantage of both more entrepreneur-friendly tax model and lower cost of workforce. And they were resettling really big swaths of their production in the Baltic states. This trend was common in the whole of the EU, of course, since free movement of people was far more complicated than free movement of goods and capital in the first years of after EU enlargement or even before. This meant that practically all Western European business, to a lesser extent Great Britain, which was more open to immigration from third states before EU enlargement, and after enlargement opened its job markets to new member states without delay. But everybody else was seeking to build factories in Eastern Europe countries at that point of time. We were the solution to their cost-cutting problems, clearly everywhere. Estonia and also other Baltic states exercised proportionality in the tax system and currency boards as their monetary policy models, compounded, in Estonian case, with a legally set obligation to balance the budget as the main guarantee of the sustainability of their currency board, and therefore, of course, the currency itself. Estonia also sported a single income tax level from early 90s and high consumption taxes, also high social tax, but from the turn of the century, no income tax at all from retained earnings. There have never been property taxes in the country to speak of, and right now there are none. There is no inheritance tax neither, and very importantly, dividends, rents, and salaries are all taxed at the same rate. Originally it was 26%, now it is 20%. So all ways and means of income were treated similarly and very simply, including capital gains. And this made our model to execute very simple, cheap to manage, and I have to say extremely advantageous to foreign direct investment. And I am explaining this not only to demonstrate why exactly Scandinavian FDI was reigning on Estonia and through Estonia also on other Baltic states, but also to remind what Scandinavian socio-economic model of last century looked like. Its quick adaptation to technological changes in most of the 20th century could be attributed to their small size and therefore flexibility at that stage. An absolute need to export for growth was enhanced after the Second World War by the emergence of the EU single market, and there was very strong social system providing well-educated workforce and healthier workforce than in many places in the developed world. It led in general, of course, to quicker passage from the hard life of precarious and even middle working class people from misery and insecurity to the middle class as we know today and try to protect to a certain extent nowadays. A happy nation, rather egalitarian in this sense that education and healthcare model provided for each and everyone, independent from their income levels. This meant that everybody had a chance in this life, and even if your mom was, say, single mom living in a hippie squat, you did not need to worry your primary and secondary education quality would be so bad that you had no chance to get to a good university and become someone. The Scandinavian model was definitely delivering at its best about the time when the Soviet Union broke down. But what was also happening was that already these countries were starting to lose out in tax competition to other countries, and of course for workforce cost to almost everyone globally. And here the newly found freedom of the Baltic states came in very handy. We could say Estonia became a front-runner in economic and social change in the Baltic states because while by the turn of the century our monetary and tax part of fiscal policy were quite similar in the beginning of 90s, it was only Estonia who strongly innovated. And innovated not in private sector, not in education, but innovated its economic environment compared to what was done elsewhere in developed world. And this provided actually a lifeline to Nordic companies who were absolutely seeking to control their costs, and they found a new innovative environmental environment quite close to home with extremely cheap workforce. The idea was always that if you do in Estonia, but our idea in Estonia was always that if you do everything like the rich industrial countries, then it doesn't help us because you cannot leapfrog. You cannot grow quicker than the originals. For example, industrial countries reached industrial employment up to 60% of the workforce. The latecomers never achieved these levels, and Estonia is far behind. So we absolutely needed to find something different to catch up because we had lost 50 years due to occupation. All this time needed to be caught up. The Baltic states at that moment were selling very good quality workforce at an extremely low price, which probably sounds unbelievable now, but it was $50 per month, taxes included. And this started to change very rapidly, but it remained truly advantageous for the first decade of our regained independence. To a certain extent, it still is advantageous, but since the free movement of people has been executed fully in EU, the gap is closing extremely quickly and does not exist anymore in high skill set, particularly in ICT, and is also closing in the low skill set part of the job market too. So Estonia in 91, it did realize that in order to restart growth, remember there was nothing. The old economy was gone. The Soviet type of factories were useless because they were unproductive and their clients were all in Russia, which did not want to and soon could not afford to buy Estonian goods. So there was real need to get capital ready to invest into the country. And Estonia privatized its state-owned businesses with no strings attached, seeking capital, technology, and access to marketing and logistics channels of the Western companies. The new owners of the businesses, they could bring this. And also they brought management quality to Estonian enterprises. It was very easy to see that as soon as the salaries start growing, this model will not deliver anymore because, of course, it will happen quite soon that there will be cheaper places globally to work. And also what we saw by the end of the first decade, most of the Eastern European countries were copying our tax models to a big extent, and we really realized that we absolutely need to do something differently again. And we had, remember, done a monetary reform which was harsh, which was against by the IMF that you shouldn't do it because it's not sustainable. We managed to sustain it because we also balanced the budget. Everybody said that, remember, the average salary was 50 together with taxes. This is not sustainable neither. You cannot balance the budget. But we did balance the budget, and Estonian currency board held until Estonia joined the euro. We had done a tax reform, which on the other side was very strongly advised by IMF and World Bank to everybody, but nobody managed to do it. We managed to do it. So we got the capital in. And initially, this was the traditional developing and evolving markets system. You get people to bring their technology and start, economic growth with quick rise of the salaries. But since we were already in the public sector quite innovative, and we were already from the beginning thinking about these leapfrogging terms, because of course we had been fallen behind Finland and Sweden and others by 50 years, we realized by the turn of the century that innovation in public sector has to continue. And then we were looking around for the technological developments globally which could help us. We found two trends. One was in biotechnology, genetic engineering, and the other was then in the digital development. And then we actually did not only create Estonian ID card, which then became the starting point of the Estonian digital development, but we also did something which is called Estonian Genome Law, which means that in case of the digital ID, we provided people with safe means to act and transact in the internet space, creating security, because if you use digital ID, it's encrypted system where you are in, so you could safely use it. In fact, we gave our people passport in the cyber world. Like in analog world, you wouldn't trust anybody unless they show you a passport. Our people got at the turn of the century the passport in the digital world. Well, side effect was, of course, that automatically Estonian people learned that the rest of the internet is not safe. It dawned on most other nations 15 years, maybe even more years later than to our people. And the other thing which we did was we created a safe environment for biotech companies to do population-level genetic analysis. And we also made sure that our people's personal data, particularly their genetic information, is well protected. Even if our insurance system works differently, we still thought that it would not be a good idea if somebody knows, somebody's genetic markers. But at the same time, we made sure that the information used by scientists and by biotech companies was not forbidden. In a safe format, when they didn't know whose data they are analyzing, they could query certain proportions. Let's say they could ask for all people who had relatives who died before the age of 50 of the heart disease, etc. So we created what? We created a sandbox, a safe environment where people, businesses, scientists, all could do things in a legally safe environment. Again, it is maybe difficult to understand, or was difficult to understand before things started to go wrong here for Facebook, for example. Because similarly in the genetic field, we had created in the digital world a legally safe, at the same time permissive environment for technology to thrive and grow in Estonia. And therefore, in our case, if companies were using our state-provided backbone of our digital system, which we call X-Road, and I hope those who have listened to Thomas definitely know what's the value of X-Road. It's an inclusive platform where both business and people can build services, an app store, but then you couldn't use this analogy when we created it at the turn of the century. But this is what it essentially is, a safe app store. If your service is provided through X-Road, your data is safe, and there is a state guarantee that your data will be kept safe. And this is something which we did for our businesses, not only for our government. Yes, Estonia is an e-state and e-government, and all our services, bar getting married and selling house, are online. But this is less important. The more important part is that we unleashed for private sector a possibility to create services online in a safe model which was guaranteed by the state. And this is something where we still say in Estonia that we live on the Mars and everybody else is still on the Earth. Because these environments do exist also in some other countries, but not in the format as we have done it, in a completely inclusive format where private sector is invited to use the same. Actually, the system was born together with private sector. And if you think it was easy for government to decide for it, then it wasn't. The government was very hesitant, and the reason was, guess what? Maybe there will not be enough services on this backbone. because state had, knew its limits. It already had an online tax board, but it knew its limits. Maybe we will only be able to create, let's say, 10 services in the first year. Then people will not start to use digital ID because they don't have to do it often enough. And then they will still find it easier to take the papers to the office instead of using digital services. So our private sector promised they will use this backbone. They will not use other identity methods. They will promote for people this backbone and this ability to be safe in using their online services. And this gave the state the courage to move ahead because it hoped that people will have enough services to exercise often enough their digital identities and their digital signatures to really start using it. And what we also provided for our companies was something which in public sector you call inclusivity, but from the private sector viewpoint, this is mass market, because everybody has a digital identity. So they got the mass market. And if we see what thereafter happened, was clearly that our companies did not start to create weird forms of digital identification. The banks were already offering kind of code cards and stuff, but they started to gradually move away from them to the X-road system of the government because this had state guarantee. Nothing else had state guarantee. Of course, it also created a system where Estonian people were using single identikit, so there is far less risk that their passwords will be written. I mean, tens of the passwords for different sites will be the same, and they will be written somewhere on their computer in one file where you can steal them. So this also created technological security, of course, but overall security in cyber world, which is very necessary in 21st century economies, cannot be created by technology. It has to be created by cyber hygiene, by people themselves thinking and realizing what is safe. And this is something which in Estonian society started to happen because we had always the safe internet, so we realized there is also the unsafe part. And this way in Estonia, if you are a digital company offering services on X-road, it cannot happen that somebody calls you to parliament and asks you to explain why these things are happening, that something's leaking. Nothing is leaking, of course, but if it were, it would be government to be blamed, not necessarily you. If you were using, applying all the necessary security elements, the X-road platform. Similarly, in the other stream of our technological aim to create the legally permissive space in the Estonian Genome Foundation, when we first did it and allowed this kind of population level working, then what this did was that we started private money. We started to see private money to come in and create the Estonian Genome Foundation. It was the private companies, mostly from here, America, who paid to Estonian Genome Foundation to gather the data of our citizens because they could use it for their academic and also business-related research. And the Estonian Genome Foundation was created, quite successfully worked for first 4 or 5 years, and then guess what happened? This, let's say, innovative legal space setting stopped delivering for Estonia for one concrete reason. Richer countries, bigger countries started to throw public money into creating similar genome databases, realizing that one day there might be actually medicines which will only work on one part of population depending on their genetic composition, let's say it this way, but not on the others. So they started to throw good public money into something which we thought is very well run if you create legally permissive space and let the public money to do the private money to do the rest. And actually, I have to say, you ruined the market for us. I said this also to Tony Blair in the YES conference in Kiev a few weeks ago. He apologized a little bit belatedly, I have to say, but Britain was one of the biggest examples. I mean, how actually our legally innovative space was not delivering anymore because public sectors messed our market up, whereas we were using good private money. I think we would all have been better off and less indebted if we had in many walks of life been able to create legally permissive space instead of actually bringing always in the public money and messing up the markets. In the digital, this did not happen, luckily, because other countries, other governments, for some reason, which I actually failed to see why, rather shunned this development that their people and their businesses were increasingly acting, transacting, communicating online. And they didn't see their obligation to their people to give safety, security, and drive anonymity out of the relations which happen on the digital platforms. And even more, they started to strongly restrict and create barriers to this kind of entries into the public service by saying that paper is safer, which is of course technologically wrong and always has been wrong. But for some reason, this thinking was really so strong that all governments globally, par Estonia, discovered themselves 15 years later, in our case, one generation of digital ID use already, in the situation where people and businesses demand security online, but the governments have failed to provide it and still continue to fail to provide it to a certain extent. When Estonia was the EU Council presidency nation, we held a digital summit, and I think that at that point, European Union nations and governments at least got this, that this is our obligation. We do not leave our people without identity in analog world. And this digital world is now big enough to, merit discussion. How come that we do not give people passports in this world? It's so big part in how they work. And now there is indeed a common understanding in the European Union that we need digital identifiers in every country, and we are working, of course, very hard to make sure that they will work all over Europe in the similar way. And we have a very big worry linked to this development, which in principle is very good, because Estonia is a tiny market and 80% of our economy is export. So as soon as we cross Estonia's border, we are back to Facebook and Amazon and Google identikits like everybody else, and we don't want it. But our risk now is that we need to make sure that if European Union applies a common strategy, then the functionality of this common EU identification check will not be less than we are offering to our people. Because otherwise we need to tell our people that part of the services would function pan-European, but part will not function pan-European. The risk is anyway there, because you may have a technical solution, but you also have to have legal agreements. We are seeing this right now when we are developing a digital ecosystem together with Finland, two sovereign states. We have now for a year and a half an absolute technical compatibility. Actually, we are using the same system with Finnish authorities. And we have not yet a single service properly running because of the legal requirements, bilateral agreements, which we need to have in order to do the simplest thing what people could think of. For example, a doctor in Helsinki writes a prescription, and the patient wants to buy this in Tallinn, which is very common. The two cities are 80 kilometers apart, and people work and live on both sides of the Gulf of Finland quite commonly. And what is more natural than it's possible to do it, and technically it's possible to do it, but bureaucratically we are still fighting with it. See, even 2 years after, when Europe decided we will provide common digital ecosystem because it's an obligation towards our citizens, we are still fighting with these most common problems. And there are even very weird side effects which are deterring the development of digital societies. I wouldn't name in which country, but in one country the digital ID exists, but that was not the game changer. Game changer was that the government decided people will only get emails, not papers anymore from the government, mail-wise, it's only emails. And they proceeded and they were quite happy. And then suddenly people started to say that, hold on, this is dangerous. And you know why it's dangerous? Our post office is going bankrupt. You see, this kind of interesting side effects keep the old developed economies back from doing these things. Yet, without Estonia, none of these countries probably will be doing even what they are now trying to do to their people. It's not only Estonia and Finland, Iceland is also joining our X-road, and since it is a tiny nation and understands better also the problems which Finland has been facing, I think they would be much quicker able to create the digital ecosystem. But as you can see, Estonia and also other Baltic states, Latvia is also quite good at digital signature, and even if there also we have not managed to, we recognize it legally, but we haven't managed to put it on the same technological platform. It's difficult, but anyway, I think we are not totally alone also thinking of Eva here. We are a little bit together in it, but we are shaking the European conservative economic climate and conservative legal space in the ways which definitely would not have been happening in Europe, in European Union in general. But the effect is bigger in Nordic countries for the reasons I explained in the beginning. Nordic countries have a habit for 30 years of actually making the stuff which everybody thinks is Finnish, like Wärtsilä or Kone or these things. They're actually made in Estonia. So they have a better insight into what has been happening in Estonia, and they are continuously demanding their governments to offer them similar low bureaucracy, easy to handle government services. Of course, since most of the demand tends to come from SME sector, because SMEs are the biggest gainers from digital infrastructure. Big businesses have the way to manage big bureaucracy, small ones don't. So it takes time to feed through to the real pressure to the government, but it is definitely happening. And therefore, I'm quite sure that while the whole Europe is gaining from the Estonian experience and its economic climate, considering also digital, is definitely developing quicker than it would have done without Estonian legal innovations in public sector. The Nordics are the biggest gainers from this. They are already big gainers because I think the Nordic economy would have stalled and would not have been able to grow if their companies could not actually make Estonians make the things made in Scandinavia. But I mean, now this effect is deepening and also turning on to more fundamental trends of making Scandinavia more receptive to the new technologies than is any other place globally. Yes, I know where we are. We are here in San Francisco, but I also know that here, even if you have a high number of privately offered digital services, the public sector is still struggling to compete, I would say. And why I think that this is a long-term development plan for the Nordics and why this trend will continue long into the future is basically two elements. One is citizen drive from Estonian citizens towards future developments now. And I tell you one example why it is the citizen drive which is happening. It is because Estonian people, they are also using private sector services online. And many private sector companies, for example, do not demand you nowadays anymore to seek their services, but they are very proactive. They offer you everything. Then, of course, Estonian people wanted that the Estonian state also reminds them when their driver's license, for example, expires, etc. This was easy to be done. We do it, and no Estonian can ever find themselves in the situation that it happens so that they don't know. I know sometimes it still happens to people, but that's because they do not check their mailbox, maybe. But because you have to connect your state-given mailbox, which is your first name dot last name at eesti.ee, you have to connect it to the mailbox you really use if you don't use that. Some people don't do it, but most do. So you're always pre-warned that your insurance is running out, your driver's license is running out, all this information comes to you automatically. I got an email asking from Estonian Ministry of Education, where will my children go to school? I was living in Luxembourg, and they didn't somehow put two and two together. And then all I had to do was to tell them online, reply to their email and say they are going to school in Luxembourg. The reason I hadn't thought of doing it was because in Luxembourg school starts at 4, in Estonia at 7. So for me it was a done deed. They were already scholarized for a long time. But the Estonian government reminded me that I have an obligation to choose the school to my children. So this way no child can also be left behind, because I mean, even lousy parents who would forget to put their child to school will get the reminder. As you see, inclusivity in the system. On the other hand, people in Estonia are now asking next question. Okay, you are sending me reminders, but frankly speaking, private sector company, if they knew I need something, they will push me to use it. So if I had a child, in Estonia we have a universal child support system. A child was born, digital ID for this child was created automatically, by the way, when the doctor enters that the baby has been born to Estonian e-health system in the background without doctor pushing any buttons. Baby gets a digital ID and gets registered. Later parents can add a name. You know I had a baby, you know I have the right to universal child support, and you know my bank account number, because I pay your taxes. Why on earth do I have to go online and apply for this money to be given to me? Why doesn't the 3 different state databases simply agree that they need to pay me something? See, the system becomes citizen-driven. And this is why Estonia will remain also in the coming years upfront of the digital services, because our political class, even if maybe it will sometime, for whatever reasons, want to lose their drive and their edge, they cannot, because people are constantly comparing our public sector to private sector services and demanding the same level. And this brings me to the second reason why I think this is a long-standing and continuing trend in Nordic countries together with Baltic states in Nordic-Baltic economic ecosystem. And this is exactly this. Estonian public sector thinks and acts as a startup. It is ready to try, it is ready to sometimes also fail. Our genome project was practically dead for 10 years. Now it's alive again, because gathering the genome data became so cheap, and Estonia is much richer now. It's 25 euros per person, by the way, that we can continue with this program. And it is now starting to deliver real life health benefits. Not in the way we thought, by the way, and everybody else thought when they started these developments. That was that we will get medicines which will only suit to certain parts of population. This is still not very common, and we don't know how much common it will be. But people know their markers. They know their diabetes 2 risk, they know their heart attack risk, and they could adjust their lifestyle accordingly. For example, I know that if I'm overweight, I have a 25% probability that by the age of 65, I will have diabetes 2. It will affect my behavior. And these kind of markers, there are hundreds now. And by the year end, this year, we'll have about 10% of population marked. So 10% of Estonians would know exactly what are the risks. And actually, since we are related, you have your relatives as well who exercise similar genome patterns as you do. That means that about 1/3 of the population roughly knows that they have, for example, high risk of the breast cancer. They can take preventive action, being pushed or nudged towards, well, going to the doctor, checking themselves out. So we are getting real life healthcare benefits, also efficiency in the system, because prevention is cheaper from this innovation. So Estonian government has a habit, has a, well, positive track record and a clear understanding since our monetary reform to the digital reform to the Estonian Genome Law and Foundation, that if you embrace new technologies by creating permissive legal space, which way you can assure both the companies, public services and people that it is safe to use the technology. And the safety comes from state guarantee, not only from technology, because of course neither X-Road nor Genome Foundation could surely function without actually in our legal space being also set that it is a criminal offense to snoop after somebody else's information. So it's legal space setting to open the economic space for new technology coming from private sector, combined with laws, which make sure that people stay safe. Not technology, laws. Initially, we had quite a few cases where people were taken to court for having looked somebody's data in the database. But we always know who did it, because there is the digital signature with which you are allowed into the system. You cannot snoop around, you have access to certain information, but let's imagine you are an authorized police officer who has access to something. Then you still cannot check everybody's information, because these people would first of all know there will be a sign, somebody checked your data, you can verify. And if you know they had absolutely no business in looking, you can complain and ask why they did it. And this person will be taken to court. This is enforcement of security in cyberspace. This is extremely necessary. The same, of course, applies to the genome law. So you see, we don't have to create technology. And honestly, we cannot. You can much better. We are 1.3 million people, and even if we are now the world's 36th richest economy, we are so tiny that even if we were first, we will never be big creators of technology ourselves. Yes, we can do it in scientific networks and using European R&D money. But in principle, what we are quick followers. We are the quick followers by creating legal space. And this benefits the whole Europe and everybody who wants to work with us, but most of all it benefits Nordic countries, because Nordic and Estonian and other Baltic economic ecosystems, they are so intertwined that you cannot even say that they are, separate. With Finland particularly, we had a saying always that the language unites us. They are similar languages, Finno-Ugric languages. Now we joke that the language is the only thing which slightly separates us. Everything is the same. So Nordic companies cannot but learn in Estonia what smart legal space setting can do for new businesses, new technologies, which kind of sandboxes can be created. And they get influenced by it. Initially, they have to come to Estonia to use this legal space, but then they force their own governments to follow. And their governments, of course, follow anyway, like they were looking at our tax model and created these reform committees to make sure they do not lose out too much to the Baltic states and Estonia in tax model. They similarly don't want to lose out too much in the digital. So even if it's much easier to stick to your old systems and to the old adage, which is still very common, I believe, here and in Europe as well, that paper is safe, they are forced to adapt. And this way, the Scandinavian economic success can continue. I'm quite sure that it wouldn't have continued also for the last 30 years anymore, because it was simply too expensive for economy. But they had the Baltic states, Estonia, the rest of Eastern Europe, where they could create, actually make things which they had created by their brain power, digging between the 2 years up north. And now this continues, this Nordic economic success, because again, there is a little catalyst somewhere under the belly of the Scandinavia, which is Estonia, where citizens themselves demand constant innovation by their public sector. And also, of course, Estonian law setting, even if imagine there is something totally new, and we have one of these things, which is AI. For this, of course, Estonian people do not demand kind of legal space setting. They don't say that one day there will be maybe, enough narrow ID or singularity even, and we need to have a law for that. They cannot ask this. But Estonian businesses can. They say, you have done Estonian Genome Law, you have created a digital state and digital ecosystem for us to use technology. There are new technologies coming. How will then Estonian legal space be okay with that? For example, in Estonia, our traffic code regulates for the situation where a car drives over a robot. We have had one of these accidents last year in October, and the car driver was found guilty, not the robot. Robot was high enough, marked as it had to be, and it was crossing the pedestrian crossing with green light, so the car was guilty. This is good, but it may sound like, okay, this is how you do it, create legally permissive space. But we started to think that, hey, this is just one little manifestation. Do we really want to go through every law every time there is a new technological change somehow? And we came to the conclusion we do not want to. Then what we are seeking is to regulate the relations between humans and algorithms already now technology-neutral way, in order to make sure that everybody who wants to, offer narrow AI services, for example, to Estonians, including the state, because remember, people are demanding that state systems decide on them and do something to them, mostly pay out money. So people are demanding that humans and algorithms interact, and we have to regulate for it. And we have now understood we will have to do it tech-neutral way. Whichever technology creates algorithms which have to do something with humans, for humans, move around among humans if they have a physical presence, not only a computerized presence. And this raises a lot of legal questions. 2 years ago, we thought that, okay, we need to create a special legal identity for AI. Now we have realized probably it's enough if we explain how all our analog rules and laws apply in the case when we are talking about algorithms. So we are innovating, and I'm quite sure that never mind who wins the next elections, this law of AI will happen because people are demanding services which do not anymore fit into the current legal space. Systems deciding about people is narrow AI application, and this is not regulated. Second, we want to continue creating this legally permissive space, which allows us to, grow our economy and our companies very quickly, who can then, because we are so intertwined with Nordic markets, upscale rather quickly up north. This we need to continue for our economic development. So whoever wins, they have to. Because as a pilot project, we already have one service which runs this way, that systems decide about a person and pay out. A pilot you can do, but you cannot have more services unless you have created this legal space for AI. And if you regulate straight for the AI, then of course also all the narrow AI, autonomous and automatic systems will also be covered. And we don't want to do it every year again. We want it to do once and for a long time in the coming years. But then of course comes additional question, and this is my last moment which I would like to mention today. This is simple fact that you have to be safe internationally as well. Estonia has created an e-government system, a digital public ecosystem, and is insisting that all people globally should have digital identities. But we see this also creates us a responsibility to make sure that legally, internationally, these matters are covered. There is a lot of academic research, I'm quite sure also here in Estonia, in the NATO Center of Excellency on cybersecurity, how analog law should apply in cybersphere. But there isn't enough international law which is being created by declarations of countries, etc., explaining to us what are your rights. For example, imagine Estonia has already actually gone under the cyber attack. I'm quite sure Thomas has told you about it, and many other Estonians as well, in 2007. A simple denial of a service attack. At that time, we were able to wall off our ecosystem so that inside the country services worked. You couldn't access from outside. I was in Luxembourg. I didn't have access during this cyber attack. But we protected the system. Nowadays, the ways and means to discover who is doing or where this attack comes from might sometimes lead you to the question that I have notified another country that on their territory is somebody attacking my vital infrastructure, therefore my sovereignty. If they do not react, what are my rights? What should I do? How can I react? Can I take it out? If they declare they are not able and therefore they are digitally failed state in my mind, we do go into failed states to, stabilize and make situations secure also for surrounding countries. What's our right in the digitally failed state? We haven't actually created enough international law on that. And we hope that by running for the United Nations Security Council non-permanent member, we can bring these issues to that table as well. I don't know whether we are successful, but already in the campaign we are raising awareness of these issues very much. And also, we see that this is an issue of global safety, maybe because we are behind the first bend, because AI systems can cause great trouble if you unleash them in some kind of military system. So all these AI risks, which we do not have time to cover today, will compound our conventional risks. They all need immediate international regulation to be covered. This is vital. There is another element, which is again economical. Our people are using internet to work. It's a great equalizer. I will give you one extreme example to explain why I think it's a great equalizer. Take an autistic person who loves to knit red socks. She does nothing else, only knits red socks. Century ago, she couldn't have made a living out of it because in their village, maybe 3 people wanted red socks. She could have signed an agreement, let's say, today with a souvenir shop to sell them, but she's autistic. She cannot communicate with people too well. And also through the souvenir shops, you cannot, probably reach the market, the market might to feed you. But globally, there are billions of people. Among them, there must be enough takers of red socks, and she doesn't have to leave her bedroom to sell them. See, this is what I mean by great equalizer. There are many chances if we get this space right globally and internationally. But what does that do to our tax systems? We are arguing now who gets Starbucks taxes, and companies say in America they pay in Europe and vice versa, and finally they pay nothing. But imagine now, people do not anymore have to gather into enterprises to get high added value from their narrow specialization. Red socks is of course a primitive example, but you could do something highly technical and sell this to 10 companies globally. Now who pays, who gets your taxes? And who pays for your social services, redistributional services, education, healthcare? And this is urgent. Everything I can think of runs straight into the face of the OECD agreements. But we need to deal with it, because otherwise young people opt out. Some fall into precarious categories because they are not making enough money from their internet sales to buy private healthcare. The rest buys private healthcare, which may be okay in this part of the world, but in Europe we have solidarity-based systems, and if better parts of the earners opt out, of course they will all opt back in when they become older and start to demand more services. But we would have lost quite a big proportion of their earnings already. So it's an urgent issue. And maybe Estonia sees it a little bit better than others because we are on the first bend. We are trying with European Ministries of Finance during our Council presidency. We started a process to put together an offer to the OECD how we could change and how we should change. But for me, following what is going on in internet and in possibilities, we are falling far behind. And this is the common Estonian frustration. We innovate to create great sandbox, but other countries are too slow to learn from us. And that's why we spend a lot of our time to run around the world, to run for the Security Council even, to explain that, these things are not waiting. We have to. Governments have the obligation to their people. And like it or not, our people are not using paper and analog world to create living and communicate with each other. So all these issues are not optional for governments, but it's an obligation towards your citizens. We continue to promote it. But meanwhile, I'm quite confident that because we are on the Mars and most people are on the Earth, that Estonia and together with it the Nordic economic ecosystem, because they are intertwined with us, we will continue to pull ahead globally for quite some years. Thank you for listening. I hope you understand a bit better now.
So we have two, well, there's someone at one of these microphones already, and there's someone else. So would you please ask your question?
Sure. Thank you for the enlightening picture, if you wish, of the future. Fascinating, the problems are interesting. However, this is America, and I'm sure that half of the audience here thinks, that's wonderful, but what about the right to anonymity? Where is that? Assuming the government is benevolent. It's not always benevolent, as you probably know, living in Estonia.
It's everywhere. The right to anonymity is everywhere. And frankly speaking, if you think you can guarantee anonymity on the paper, you can guarantee the anonymity exactly the same way in digital sphere. Technology doesn't change this aspect. This is very, yes, absolutely. But digital ID, it's for you to use to communicate with the state. You probably also, when you seek, let's say, social services, fill in papers, giving some information about yourself, which the state has legal obligation to protect. It doesn't matter whether this information is given to the state on paper or in the database. The state has a legal obligation to protect this data. Now, your government has a legal obligation, and my government has a legal obligation. But my government is accountable to me every day. You do not know who reads really your papers if they are in the government office once you have given over this information, whereas I know. Because every time somebody checks my data in digital database, I will get a notification. This way, I see that in digital ID world, my information, which by the Estonian law belongs to me, not to the government, is protected, it's enforced by the law. Those who offend my right to my data and my ability to keep my data to myself will be taken straight to the court. I think in many countries, people do not know who lives through their health registries in the doctor's office. I know. So there is definitely no such thing like absolute safety and absolute guarantee. What I'm only telling is that digital is more accountable and safer.
I'm Eilif Tronson with Silicon Vikings. I know there are interesting things happening in terms of using digital tools and technologies in the educational sector, education and learning around in the different Nordic countries. Is there anything happening in Estonia that can help the Nordics collaborate and coordinate more in that area, based on all the work that you've done in digital technology?
We have a discussion in Estonia, and this discussion deals with the fact that more and more child's knowledge base when entering school or going into 3rd grade or whatever is not a function of the child's age, but a function of what the child has been interested in looking around the internet space. For example, I asked my own son, he's in 4th grade, and he's fluent in French and English due to living internationally, and he was complaining that English is boring and do nothing at school. And I asked, how many children in your class really, need what is in your books? And in the books it is more or less, first level of English. This is dog. How do you do this kind of stuff? Maybe a little bit more advanced, I haven't looked. And he said 1. So 1 child is learning and 34 kids are bored in the class. And we have now the discussion that we should actually develop our curriculum available online so that it's not only in language teaching, there it's most visible, but it's also in math and other areas. We have smart math learning programs in Estonian language for Estonian kids. And these children who use them for play online, they are bored in the class. So teacher will have to become kind of supporter of the learning, but kids must be able to learn using MOOCs more and more independently. We have this discussion. We have a nucleus of something which is called Global Estonian School, or around the world Estonian School. And this is now a small proportion of our primary and curricula and secondary as well, to help children to keep contact with Estonian language while they are learning in other places globally, chemistry, physics, etc., so that they can have Estonian language terminology. I seriously hope that I can convince, because this discussion, I have to say, is something I have started in the country, I can convince our government that we need to have a fully fledged Estonian school curricula online so that children can learn according to their knowledge, not in function to their age. And I see these developments elsewhere. Sometimes new school systems are born out of the old bureaucratic system. Paris 42 is a good example. So this kind of innovation is going on everywhere. And I do hope that here again, Estonia will be able to be among the best and first. We have a strong basis. We rank high in PISA. And we spend a lot on education, close to 7% of our GDP. So we have space and capacity probably again to be in the forefront. But we are not yet there. My child is still bored in English class.
So I might ask that you make it possible for people like me to take the Estonian course that you're offering to your children.
Yes,
that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question regarding the population and demographic trends in the Baltic states, and more specifically, I think, to the extent that I'm aware of, is that the population of these states has fluctuated, and even though the recent trend is that there has been a decline in emigration, it continues to be an issue. And despite the innovative and pioneering work that you've shared with us here, it appears to me that part of the challenge is one of size. And my question more specifically is Estonia friendly towards immigrants? And can immigration, just as Germany has adopted a policy of inviting immigrants to their country, do you believe that the Baltic states can benefit from a similar policy?
Mm-hmm. First of all, about the citizens leaving the country. There is a reason why you have a free movement of people in the European Union, and this is for the people to find the best gainful employment everywhere in Europe. So it would be absolutely rude to say that this is not a nice thing for them to do. This freedom is there to be used. What is the state's obligation, meanwhile, is to make sure that citizens stay in contact with their state. For example, by offering e-voting, which we do. This means that Estonians, even if in Luxembourg, UK, wherever, they are not away. Every day they can be home. They can vote. It takes 2 minutes, like for every other Estonian citizen, which is probably the highest, the best manifestation of how you still stay Estonian, even if you are living elsewhere. You are Estonian citizen, and you live elsewhere. What I also see is that with salaries going up about 7% per year in Estonia, for 4 years, actually in Estonia, the trend has turned. We have more immigration than emigration. Estonians coming back, but not only. There are other people who are coming to Estonia now more and more. And the European job market is free. So with the continuous rise of the salaries, you get more and more people coming to Estonia. If you ask about being immigration friendly, then we are selectively immigration friendly. As I said, EU market is open, and also if you come to work in companies which qualify for startup status, and this is a qualified, it's not a quantified analysis, it's qualified analysis, then you can come wherever you come from India, from China, from Russia, from Ukraine. It doesn't matter. You go for startup work in startup sector, you are allowed to work in Estonia. We are not enough open to my taste. If you make a PhD in Estonia, you can stay in Estonia. But less academic degrees, for example, do not guarantee you automatic right. I think it will change. What we also do is we operate the e-residency program by creating a big part of, a high number of people working, having a kind of foothold in European Union, establishing companies, etc. And sooner or later, we will ask ourselves the question, can we make a special offer to those people to actually settle in Estonia, because they would have proved already, their trustworthiness, because they run their companies, etc. in Estonia. So we are discussing this, but I admit that Estonia could be much more open to people to come to the country. It takes time. 30 years has not been enough, and there is a specific reason as well. Estonia has to develop its school system this way that everybody who settles in Estonia is able to learn Estonian language already in kindergarten and in school. And since we have a big Russian-speaking minority, we have struggled to provide this to all our citizens. And therefore, we are, as voters, a little bit afraid of newcoming people from elsewhere. But we are working on it, because quite soon Estonia will not have anymore the Estonian and Russian schools separately. It will have only Estonian school, and big part of the problem on how to teach children to speak Estonian language will be taken away, and our hands will be freed to deal with teaching people coming from India, China, Ukraine, Estonian language. So I'm quite sure that this will also change. But here you are right. This is quite conservative country as far as immigration is concerned. It has extremely low unemployment rates, always has had, and it is in dire straits looking for the workforce. But actually, what our companies are doing, how they are surviving, is exactly this. You can go outside and make things elsewhere. GNI is no worse than GDP, after all. This is the French and German model after enlargement. They kept their job markets closed to Eastern Europeans, forced their companies to invest in Eastern European countries. UK opened its job market and its GDP grew as opposed to its GNI. But it became very visible who is causing the stagnation of the salaries in the precarious classes, whereas in France and Germany, effect was the same, but it was not visible on the street.
Honorable President, thank you for giving us your illustrious knowledge and wisdom. I appreciate that. My inquiry to you is not in technology, it's not in economics or politics, it's just a human one. My wife is Estonian. On her behalf, on my mother-in-law's behalf, I say, tere, kuidas elad? How are you? My reason for standing here is because I made an obligation to my mother-in-law before she passed away. She emigrated from Estonia when the Russians invaded Estonia, and my mother-in-law and her husband had to flee from Estonia into Germany, and that's where my wife was born, in a displaced persons camp. And throughout the years, my mother-in-law always asks me if I can locate her brother, who was arrested by the Russians and taken to Siberia. She lived all her years and died at 93 years old, never knowing or seeing her brother for 70 years. She died. My wife was home ill, and she says, Ron, could you please ask the Estonian president how to assist you, at least to start to find out what happened to her uncle. Tänan.
Indeed, this is a question which is still making many hearts in Estonia to bleed. We just this summer opened a memorial for all Estonians who suffered through Stalinist repression and during the Second World War were taken to Siberia, killed. And there are names, but there is also a lot of empty space because we know that many people do not know what happened to their beloved ones. And this work is not over. We are continuing. Constantly people are going through the archive data nowadays, trying to use also, if you get some data, you try to match this data with some other data using digital methods even, because you can well try to find with similar but not exactly the same named peoples going through Russian archives, and some of them as well now are becoming digital, and we constantly unearth every year the last days and years of still tens of people. So one day it might happen that we discover what happened also to your relatives in Siberia, but there are many still who do not know. We are working on it, we have not given up, and we are not closing this file, at least not for now. We are continuing to seek. On the other hand, we cannot say that we have a neighbor who is very helpful in trying to help us in this work, but we continue. We do continue.
I just want you to, I have all the information. I even have photographs when my mother-in-law and her brother were kids. And I have all the names, I have all the information. I was wondering, before you leave, if you can just give me a start as to where I should start seeking such knowledge or...
Give me these names and information, okay, and we will forward it to the Estonian body which is looking for these people. I know they continue their work, and okay, maybe they already have something or can quite easily find it. I do not know.
Okay, thank you so much.
This will be our last question.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was wondering, for people who are not digitally savvy or don't have online access, how are they able to interact with the government and receive social services? Thank you.
First of all, there are no such people who have no access to internet. When we started digitalizing our public services, we made sure that at least in public libraries, etc., because at that time really not many people had computers at home or internet connection, this was free. It was just closer than public office. So if you found, and also we had a big program which was called Tiger Leap. We don't have tigers in Estonia, but yet we taught first young children and then we taught retired people to use digitalized services. And you know, it very often at these years happened that an old lady was getting ready to take a bus, but stopped by a village library to wait for the bus. And the young voluntary or the library keeper said, but you don't have to go to this government office. You can do it online. Let's learn it. Let's do it. And our grandmothers are much more Facebook compatible than they are elsewhere. This is true. And of course, if you really cannot, then there is the place where you can go in your local government and say that, I mean, help me. And somebody will be the teller for you in all these services. It's possible, so it's not, and also you can still vote on paper, by the way. And many people do for the nice feeling of having done it on paper. So you don't have to, but it's so much more comfortable, so much time saving. And we think we save about 4 working days per capita every year by not queuing in the government offices. It's a strong incentive even for the old people. But initially they needed a nudge, and our banks gave a big hand here. They offered their services free online for retired people. And our pensions were extremely low at that time, maybe 20, I would think they could have been actually less than $100 at that point, definitely. I mean, when we already started to promote digital services, if you could save maybe $1 per month, it was worth learning digital, especially as it was available free in village library or in school or somewhere. So it's a work. It doesn't happen all by itself. But we did this work.
Thank you.